Welcome to Growing Empires. I'm Jennifer DeJesus, real estate investor and operator. This show takes you behind the scenes of how real estate assets are executed, managed, and positioned for long-term performance. Let's get into it.
Well, hey there, Jennifer. This is Terry Pappy. I am back with my dear friend and client, Jennifer DeJesus, and we are going to continue the storytelling of how Jennifer became the incredible real estate maven that she is today. So, Jen, thanks for coming back and having some more fun just talking about your journey. So where we left off last on the second part of our storytelling was where you were sharing how you met this client, Bob, and how it just kind of led you into this new aspect of working with real estate in these incredible new service-focused ways. And so because you have multiple businesses, I want our listener to be kind of like understand how you came into being and having those businesses. What made you start them? How did it evolve? What were you trying to accomplish? Was your original vision to have all these businesses and offer all these things? So before we get into that, I just want to welcome back our listener and thank you for being here. We're really enjoying having this conversation and are just looking forward to sharing more about Jennifer's journey. So Jen, let's start with, bring us back to like where we finished last time, where you talked about Bob. So Bob started giving you other asks where he was needing other things related to his real estate. So let's start there. I think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily asks. It was more just feedback, right? It was his attempt to help me understand what he was looking for as it related to his financial investment. And I think I had mentioned previously that his ultimate goal was to put his son through college, give him a place to live because he was attempting to go to Lehigh University. And then he planned to use that investment for a financial play. He was going to use that investment for long-term real estate cash flow. And then he was going to build upon that year over year. So just by listening to him, I started to perfect the services around the feedback. And my desire was always just to make sure that he was happy. Just like any other client you would expect to service in whatever avenue or industry that you're servicing the client, you would expect to try to always exceed their expectations. So I listened intently. I educated myself. If I didn't understand, I asked a lot of questions. And then I tried to model that service around what he was asking me for. And the evolution of the businesses really was just more of that. Because after Bob started to learn that I was able to do what he said, like I think I mentioned that he wanted to see that I had a brain. Well, I have a brain and I can use it and I can put two and two together. I don't need to be like led to the water. So as I was putting two and two together and I was getting results and I was providing that feedback to him, he was giving me the old like kind of pat on the back, but he was rewarding me in at such a higher level than just his feedback. And it was referrals, his client referrals. And he was a financial advisor for Wall Street. And his job was to talk to very wealthy people and explain different avenues for them to invest their wealth. So when he started to identify that real estate was providing a vehicle for him to increase his net worth and increase his wealth and provide that passive income for his retirement plans, he was referring other people to do the same. So I got his best friend, Dominic, and then a client, and then another client, and then another client, So what I did with all of them was exactly what I did with Bob. And it was just to first try to understand how they viewed money, how they viewed their goals, their financial goals. And then I would listen intently to the things that they would say to me. And every single time it was just a mold on the business. It was just a little bit of a tweak, a little bit of a change. Another kind of like lesson, right? I take these to be like lessons, right? I did something, maybe it didn't work out the way that I intended. I got feedback from the client, and then I manipulated my actions based on that feedback. But there were certain clients over the years that were truly impactful to the growth of the business and leveling up the service that we were providing. Another one that comes to mind is Shane. Again, still a very long-standing client, a very good friend, somebody I've known for a decade plus as well. Shane had a moment where he gave me something very pivotal for my business. And that was kind of like my next step, my next major impact in the business. And Shane's feedback was around things that you deal with in rental properties, right? If you either love or you hate owning rental properties, right? And for the people that hate it, they've had bad instances where they haven't figured out how to navigate out of them, or they didn't have the right people in the right seats. So evictions are one of those examples, right? It's just something that happens. People go through life circumstances, and, although I think everybody signs a lease and intends to pay, things happen. And if you're not somebody that knows how to budget appropriately, you could be making the wrong mistakes. And occasionally there are times that you have to evict tenants for non-payment or other lease violations. So Shane had one in one of his first properties that he had owned with me, where the tenant was being evicted for non-payment. They were going through a life circumstance, and although we had tried very hard to work with them and offer payment plans, they still have an obligation, and it's to pay the rent. And this particular tenant was no longer able to pay the rent, so we did have to go all the way through the eviction process. But for whatever reason, this tenant took a different level of pain in the neckness, right? And what that tenant actually ended up doing, besides not paying rent and getting evicted, is they destroyed the property on the way out. Like literally destroyed it. Like putting a hammer through a wall. Anything and everything that you can think of was what the end result was of this particular property. And there's very little things that you can control in life, and what somebody's going to do inside an apartment they have rights to, it's very hard to control. You're not there every second, all day, all night. So there wasn't anything that we could do to prevent that from happening. Shane gave me some very critical feedback, and his comment was, I wish there was a way that we could have seen this coming. Now, we knew that we were evicting the tenant, right? But the tenant previous to that wasn't giving us any reason to do anything. It was a good tenant, and they were even a good paying tenant up until the point they stopped paying. And then from there, it just spiraled out of control. And they went from not paying rent to thoroughly damaging the property. So it wasn't just that Shane lost a month or two of rent till we got the tenant out. It was now Shane lost a month or two of rent and thousands of dollars in property damage. So that problem, as I mentioned, spiraled out of control and got way worse than it needed to be. Shane's comment to me was, again, a sticking point for me. It was a moment that shaped my business. And again, what he said to me was, I wish we could have seen this coming. And, I feel like a little computer engine sometimes where I'm like, processing the data. So I absorb the data, and I usually will say something like, well, let me think about that. Let me see if I can come up with something. And then I ponder all day, all night, and I usually will come up with it myself because I'm not visionary. But if I can't come up with it myself, I will usually ask other people, hey, what do you think about this? What do you do? I network with a lot of other property management companies, believe it or not. My competition, good friends of mine, good colleagues in the business. And we share our kind of wins and losses with each other on a competitive level, but also on a cohesiveness level. We're trying to help each other. So I have them call me for things and I call them for things. So occasionally I'll take these ideas and I'll say, hey, what do you do about this? Have you ever experienced this? But this particular one was one that I actually ended up taking back to my leadership team at the time. Okay. And I said, listen, Shane gave me some really critical feedback, and I think it warrants a larger discussion. And what can we do as an organization to be able to provide a higher level or sense of what's happening with his properties prior to something like this happening. And what we came up with as an organization was something we still call today quarterly inspections. And what that means is that we now go into every single unit without fail, every single quarter, inside and out of the building. And what we provide for each of the owners is a very detailed reporting on what's in good order, what's not in good order, and what do they need to do to prevent future costly repairs, right? So we identify leaks before we have massive water bills. We identify trip and fall hazards before somebody falls and sues you. So we are looking at the buildings now from a maintenance perspective, but it was also our way to make sure the tenant was behaving. And it was actually more about the tenant than it was about the maintenance at the time, but we learned that we could actually kind of kill two birds with one stone. So by being in the face of these tenants once a quarter, like in their homes, scheduled appointments, they are much less likely to do anything that would cause damage because we're in their face all the time. And we're able to catch a lot of maintenance issues on buildings before they kind of spiraled out of control. Because again, what tenants will never do is tell you that there's something wrong in their building. Right? They won't think twice about the toilet that doesn't fill all the way and shut off. It'll just keep running all day, all night, and they think it's like normal. And it's not. It's water just literally leaving the house. So those are some of the things that we did. And, today I can tell you that one experience that we have had with Shane, it hasn't happened since. I'm proud to say it has not happened since, not to that level. Now, have people done damage to properties? Yeah, sometimes there's domestic disputes. I mean, yeah, dog, a cat, you never know. Kids, right, that paint on walls, like there is damage. I certainly don't want to act like there's never damage, but the level that tenant destroyed that property never happened again after we implemented these quarterly inspections. And we still do it today. Again, 16 years later, we're still doing those quarterly inspections because they were really pivotal in the business.
What I find really interesting about that story is, and this is me being very customer experience oriented, but I find it really interesting because if you go in there once a quarter, not only does the tenant, they're like, okay, they're being vigilant, right? So, but you're also able to engage, not in every case, maybe they're not there when you go, but you're also able to engage them in like, what sort of things do we need to fix for you? So for example, if they just keep forgetting to let you guys know in the normal process of letting the landlord know that there's a problem with a leak or something's, the toaster oven's not working or whatever. That gives you the opportunity to, check almost like a wellness check. It's like, you guys doing all right? What can we do to help you kind of thing. And I can't tell you how many times you hear about absentee landlords that basically just say, they'll take, a whole bunch of deposits, last month, security, blah, blah, blah. And then they have you sign up like 50 papers and they hand you a key and they say, have a nice life, right? And don't be late with your rent. And then they're gone. Like, just trying to get somebody to give some TLC to a problem in the unit because the person's living there. So they're going to obviously want it to work and be safe and the heat on and the cool on and so on. And I think that that's a great opportunity it's almost like a customer service type of an aspect of managing that property. So I really like that story. So tell me more about how some of these live incidents or requests from your clients have given you the inspiration to come up with these solutions.
Yeah. So, for me, it's just about always continuing to perform at the highest level possible. We talk about in my companies, we talk about execute with excellence all the time, right? That's what our mission is. And it's always been my mission. And it's something that still exists today. We're always trying to execute with excellence. So I look for opportunities to create a higher level of service in everything that we do. And, certainly there's no perfection in business, right? Things are going to work, things are not going to work. Employees are going to do the right thing. Sometimes we do the wrong thing, right? But we want to always be executing with excellence. So, I make it my mission to even teach my own staff that it's not that we made the mistake. It's what we do after that means everything in the world, right? It's not that the mistake happened. You're not my children. I'm not going to slap you on the hand or spank you in the butt and tell you, you're bad. We're going to take those opportunities and use them as learning experiences. And I think that mindset, was initially shaped by Bob, because I realized that he didn't care if I made mistakes. He cared that I owned it. So another one of our core values is own it, right? We take that to heart. So we can make the mistake, but our duty, our job, our obligation is to then try to fix it and make sure that we're not going to ever make that mistake again. And of course, sometimes we have to do the right thing and we've got to, pay up when we make a mistake. That's a financial burden, but to somebody else, but we're going to always just level up our service. So I've taken that across all companies. And, Terry, you had asked me previously, did I ever expect that I was going to own these companies? Never. I got into real estate. What the heck was I thinking? I didn't think ever that there would be these companies, but every single one of them, and I will be honest and say, was a solution to a problem I was facing. So, first it was real estate, then it was the management. And then, as the management was evolving, right, the next step was the title company. So why did I go to left field, right? The title industry has nothing to do with, property management as a whole, right? But remember, I was helping these investors buy these properties first. That's a real estate transaction. And, where we are in Pennsylvania, we don't typically use attorneys unless they're really big commercial deals, millions of dollars, right? But for these smaller investment properties, we're using title companies to do closings on properties. So that was the next issue that I was facing. So I was helping a large volume of people buy a ton of real estate investments. And we would go under contract, we would pick the property, we would put our business plans together, and I would take it into management. But before I could take it into management, we had to go to closing. And I got so frustrated with the lackluster experiences my clients were experiencing from title companies that didn't understand anything about investment properties, right? So for example, you have to transfer ownership of leases from the seller to the buyer, and you have to do what they call prorated rents. So like if I sold the property on the 15th of the month, I was due that money up until the 15th, but from the 15th to the end of the month, the new owner was due that money. So we had to collect prorated rents. We had to collect security deposits. We had to do assignments of leases. And the amount of title companies that I was experiencing that had no clue how to service this type of real estate deal, it was alarming to say the least. Not to mention there are some critical components when it comes to your protection, because the title industry is providing you a title policy, and that title policy is proving that they have done their historical research on properties to make sure that you're buying clear title. So if you don't even know how to operate a deal, that you can't read a contract and realize that there's prorated rents and prorated securities. I was not confident that they were doing a 60-year search to make sure that there was no clouds on title, or there was no chain of command that was broken. I was just not confident. And that's a huge liability concern. So for me, my next move was to make sure that my clients could experience just a cleaner closing, right? A cleaner closing with somebody that truly understood what investments look like, how you closed them, how you protected them, and then we're moving on to the next one. So I created in 2018, I think it was, 2018, I created the Steel Abstract, the title company. And the title company today only closes investment property transactions for the most part. She's absolutely a master in it. My title agent has been in the business for 28 years. And she is absolutely phenomenal. She gets 5-star ratings from every one of our clients. She gets A++ ratings from all of our underwriters. And that's a really big deal because that's an audit, right? That's an audit. So it's making sure that our files are where they need to be. But yeah, she's just absolutely phenomenal. So it was important to me to make sure that I could continue my services and that there wasn't going to be somebody else in the transaction giving my client a less than stellar experience. Almost like tainting it a little bit is what it felt like to me. It felt like dirty, you know? So that was the evolution of the title company. And the construction company didn't come till a little bit later. And that actually started as a funny story from the management company. There's always a funny story. So, I have these like highs and lows, right? Emotional highs and lows. And there's just some things that really get under my skin. So, up until this point, I was still subbing out all the work for all of our maintenance for the property management company. We had subs. Everything was subbed out. We weren't doing any work in-house. And because we were now up to a few hundred units, we clearly were evicting people as well as we needed to. Now, there wasn't a lot of it, but every eviction requires you to go in and change out locks, right, on a door. The constable meets you there, and you change the locks on the door, right? I got so mad at a $500 bill to change out a lock on a door that bred my maintenance division. It was something that simple. It just took me over the edge. And, I called up the vendor and I said to him, I was so heated. I was like, you must think I am the largest idiot in the entire world because I know that you can go buy that lock set for $35. And I know that it took you 15 minutes, maybe 30 if you had trouble with the lock, right? But it didn't cost you $500. It didn't even cost you $300. So what in the world would make you think that I would pay you $500 to change out a $35 lock, right? And I literally said, never again. So my first maintenance guy, his only job was to change out locks. And just do these like little tchotchke things because I was so irritated. I was like, you have got a real set on you to think that I'm going to pay you this obnoxious amount of money. And this was a vendor, by the way, this was a vendor that had done a lot of services for us. They were making a lot of money. We were probably, I don't know, $300, $350 maybe by then. They were making a lot of money on us. And he still did not think twice about giving me this most obnoxious bill I had ever seen. And it was just a lock, but it made me so upset that I had to figure out a solution. And my solution then was to hire a handyman, right? And that first handyman definitely wasn't super handy, right? He could do a couple of little things, but that's all I needed him for. I was just trying to cut out on those little things. And I think what was happening or what I was realizing in the industry is, vendors as a whole, they want to do the large jobs, right? Like they don't want to do a roof repair. They want to do a roof replacement. They don't want to do a repair on a heating system. So they tell you that you got to replace the heating system, right? I realized that there was this gap of honesty, right? There was this gap of price value and there was this gap of service. And I wanted to just plug that hole. I wanted to fill that gap. So for me, it was about bringing on some skilled labor to the point of we could just do these little repairs that the vendors would overcharge us because they didn't actually really want the work. It was more like nuisance work to them. So that's what we started doing. And the evolution of the construction company came because the requests started getting larger and larger and larger. So it went from changing out locks to, can you fix a faucet? Can you rewire this light switch? Can you turn over a unit, which is like paint and flooring and more carpentry work? And then, the requests just got larger and larger. So that one handyman was then born into a maintenance division. Okay. And at that time, it was just fixing things. So a tenant broke something or something broke in the property, we would go fix it. So my little handyman turned into a maintenance division. And so we started insourcing or in-housing all maintenance, all repairs. We would still sub out big work. We would still sub out big work like water heater replacements, roofing work, concrete work, that sort of things. But we were handling all maintenance, little maintenance repairs. We were still subbing out carpentry work and turnover work. So as a tenant would move out of a unit and we'd have to turn it and make it, they call it make ready for the next tenant, we would have to hire somebody out. We would sub it out. Again, I started getting frustrated with the, over promise, under deliver. So if I have you scheduled and you're supposed to show up on Monday for the job and you tell me it's a 5-day job, I'm ready to fill that unit 5 days from now. But then I would get the excuse, oh, I got sick. Oh, my sub quit for the day. Or, it was just one after the other. So that week-long, turnover turned into 3 weeks before the job was done. And again, because learning from Bob and Shane and some of these other really awesome clients, I learned that every single day is $1. It costs you money. So it's not okay that your sub called out sick. It's not okay that you didn't finish your previous job, because I'm paying you for service and I want it now. So we went from maintenance division to now we have a turn division. So we have a whole separate crew of people that go in and do make readies. So a tenant moves out, they go in, they paint, they add flooring, they do any repairs that are needed. So we have 2 different divisions, right, in our organization now. And as we started doing more carpentry work, the requests started getting larger. It was, can you rehab this building I'm about to buy? Can you flip this building I'm about to buy? And that's where the construction company was born. It was born because there's definitely a different skill set between maintenance guys and turn guys and construction guys. It's a different trade. It's a different set of skills. So today it looks very different. My construction company now has licensed plumbers, licensed electricians. We have, our general license for construction, but the skill set of these guys is far superior to our maintenance guys who just are fixing items. And we're doing full-blown carpentry and building walls and you name it. We're gut rehabs. I mean, we do a lot of gut rehabs on properties, and we do a lot of repurposing now today. So that's kind of how that expanded. And the construction company, because again, Jennifer gets mad and that's how things happen. So the construction company actually started as a snow and landscaping company. It wasn't actually a construction company. It started as snow and landscaping. So what do you think what do you think happened one snowstorm? We had somebody just not show up, right? So we had hundreds of units calling us, blowing up our phones because we had a big snow, and the snow vendor, the subcontractor that we had hired, had issues with their plow trucks and issues with their staff. And again, not my problem, not my circus, not my monkeys, right? But I just got so frustrated because of the amount of calls. I mean, we were doing double time just to fill the void for what this subcontractor messed up. So I immediately went to one of my guys and I said, I want you to figure out how much it costs to buy plow trucks and salt and snow blowers and shovels, and you give me a breakdown of what that is, and we're going to see if we can afford it. By the next winter, we were plowing snow. And again, it just kind of built from there. But it usually starts out with me either listening to somebody or getting mad. Those are usually the two extremes, right? But one of those two is going to be the reason why something is born, right? And that's kind of how we've evolved. Now construction does pretty much everything except roofing and foundations. That's the only thing that we don't do.
We're probably right around the corner, given your track record. But what I find hilarious, Jen, is like some companies taking care of their clients and customers by partnering with a vendor and calling the vendor in because, obviously you don't want to be soup to nuts, right? And if they didn't, meet the needs, your needs in particular, then you would go find a different vendor. But you didn't do that. You decided, okay, I'm going to get mad and I'm going to create my own business out of it. But I can see how these, and just to kind of recap for our listener, I can see how these all fit together in this so-called ecosystem as we're referring to it now. And what's interesting is, and I actually have a question about why you did independent businesses versus just kind of adding services to one business. But if we look at the acquisition, that's Steel City Realty. That's acquiring the property, helping that client get into that property, negotiate a good price, do all the legal stuff. And then, of course, your closing and compliance with Steel Abstract, which is all your title and settlement. And then you move into, if there's any need for renovation or construction, you've got that with Empire Property Construction, and that can come before or after. And then, of course, to manage the whole thing from tenant to turnover is your Empire Property Management. And it really is an ecosystem, what you've created here in all of these businesses. But what I wanted to ask you was, essentially, why did you take the approach, and this is obviously more of a business structure question, but why did you take the approach of creating just a singular business versus just expanding your services and having maybe divisions under one umbrella?
It was a little bit of guidance from my advisors, and it was more about compliance. So each one of these industries has separate compliance requirements. They had separate insurance requirements. Some of them have different state licensing requirements or certifications. So for me, it was just cleaner to have separate entities that could not only service our deal flow or our businesses, but potentially start servicing to consumer, right? Direct to consumer or direct to business, which we do now. For example, our construction company does business to business service. So our construction company actually provides services for other management companies that haven't figured out how to not have really bad vendors, right? And again, some of my colleagues in the business, they call me and say, hey, we're having trouble with our plow trucks. Can you go plow for us today? Absolutely. We want, so we're hired a lot of times to go in and do the make readies for the properties for other property management companies. We also do what they call fire life safety, which is for commercial properties, where they check to make sure the elevators, the lighting, the fire alarm systems, all of that is working. So we do a lot of those different divisional things inside the construction company now. But the individual businesses, to answer your question, was really more about compliance and cleanliness and different books. And, my hope was, as I started to identify the need for our current clients, that I was also going to figure out a way to identify needs for the consumer and be able to provide that. Interestingly enough, though, we always tested it on our own business, right? So we always started in-house, kind of like behind our curtain, I call it, right? Behind our curtain, providing services. And then once we got to the point where we mastered it, we then opened up those services to the consumers. But we did it after we knew that we had a clear roadmap of how to, execute with excellence.
I think it's hilarious that your quote unquote soft competitors are coming to you for help. Hey, Jen, we need help with this. Hey, Jen, can you do this? Well, no wonder everything has been so successful. Not only do you have that high degree of quality and excellence, and the performance of your team is above par, and you solve as a team, which I think is a powerful leadership model, and you're realizing the results, and these are just kind of expanding and growing. And I love it. I think it's great. And I never heard all the details of the story, so thank you for laying it out in so much greater detail. Let's go ahead and pause for now. And in the next interview, what I'd like to cover is, now you need to bring us into how you got into creating syndications and these financial models based on real estate. And I'm really excited about hearing about that. So to my listener, thanks for hanging in there with us. Hope you know so much more about Jen's ecosystem and how they all came about. And Jen, I will see you in the next interview.
Sounds good. Thank you.
That's it for now. If passive income from real estate investments plays a role in your long-term investment strategy, this show is for you. Thanks for listening. And for more in-depth resources, please head over to growingempires.com.